Title: Echoes of a Broken Vow. Chapter 1: The Perfect Beginning. My name is Daniel Turner, and if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you that my life was perfect. I had everything a man could ever want: a successful career, a beautiful home, and most importantly, the love of my life, my wife Claire. We met when we were both fresh out of college, brimming with ambition and a shared passion for life. Claire was the kind of woman who lit up every room she walked into. With her bright blue eyes, golden hair, and infectious laugh, she had a way of making everyone around her feel special. I was no exception. We fell in love quickly, the kind of love that sweeps you off your feet and makes you believe in fairy tales. We spent our weekends exploring the city, taking spontaneous road trips, and dreaming about the future. Claire was my best friend, my confidante, the woman I wanted to grow old with. We got married 2 years after we met, in a small, intimate ceremony in the countryside. It was a perfect day, with the sun shining down on us as we exchanged our vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of our lives. Looking into Claire's eyes that day, I believed with all my heart that nothing could ever come between us. Chapter 2: The Subtle Shift. The first few years of our marriage were blissful. We were both building our careers, Claire in marketing and I in finance, and we supported each other every step of the way. Our life was filled with laughter, love, and the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you found your person. But then, gradually, things began to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I didn't even notice it happening. Claire started working longer hours, often coming home late, tired and distracted. She would brush off my concerns, telling me that it was just the demands of her new position. I wanted to believe her, so I did. Our conversations became shorter, less meaningful. The easy banter we once shared was replaced by a kind of strained politeness that made me uneasy. We stopped going on our spontaneous adventures, and even when we were together, there was a distance between us that I couldn't quite bridge. I tried to talk to Claire about it, to understand what was going on, but she always had a way of deflecting my concerns, reassuring me that everything was fine. "It's just work, Danny," she would say, using the nickname she had given me when we first started dating. "I'm just tired. Things will get better, I promise." But they didn't get better. They got worse. Chapter 3: The Unraveling. I remember the day it all started to unravel. It was a Friday evening, and I had come home early, hoping to surprise Claire with a homemade dinner. I had been thinking a lot about us, about how distant we had become, and I wanted to do something special, something to remind her of the love we shared. But when I walked through the door, the house was empty. Claire's car wasn't in the driveway, and there was no note, no text, nothing to indicate where she had gone. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I told myself that she was probably just stuck at work, that she would be home soon. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of Claire. I tried to stay calm, but a growing sense of dread was creeping into my chest. It wasn't like her to be out of touch for so long. I called her again and again, but there was no answer. It was well past midnight when she finally came home. She walked through the door, looking disheveled and exhausted. When she saw me sitting in the living room, waiting for her, she froze. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "I'm sorry, Danny," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I was at work. There was a last-minute crisis with a client, and I couldn't get away. My phone died, and I couldn't call you. I'm really sorry." Something in her tone, in the way she avoided looking at me, made my heart sink. I wanted to believe her, but a small voice in the back of my mind was telling me that something wasn't right. "You should have called from the office," I said, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "I know, I'm sorry," she said again, finally looking at me with a pleading expression. "It won't happen again. I promise." I nodded, forcing a smile, but the unease in my chest didn't go away. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, trying to convince myself that Claire was telling the truth. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Chapter 4: The Discovery. The days that followed were tense. Claire continued to work long hours, and the distance between us grew. I found myself becoming more and more suspicious, questioning every late-night work call, every text message that she quickly put away when I entered the room. One evening, about a month after that fateful night, I came home to find Claire in the shower. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, and for the first time in our marriage, I did something I never thought I would do. I went through her messages. What I found shattered my world. There were dozens of messages between Claire and a man named James. They weren't the kind of messages exchanged between colleagues or friends. They were intimate, filled with inside jokes, flirty banter, and plans to meet up. The most recent message was from just a few hours earlier. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you." My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages, reading each one with growing horror. The messages dated back months, long before I had started noticing the changes in Claire. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The woman I loved, the woman I had promised to spend my life with, was having an affair. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hardly breathe. I wanted to confront Claire, to demand an explanation, but I was too shocked, too hurt, to do anything but sit there in stunned silence. When Claire came out of the shower, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in my hand. She froze when she saw the look on my face. "Danny," she began, but I cut her off. "Who is James?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger and pain. Claire's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. "Who is he, Claire?" I demanded, standing up and pushing the phone towards her. "How long has this been going on?" She looked down at the phone, and tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Danny," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." Her words felt like a knife to my heart. "How long?" I asked again, my voice breaking. 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. 6 months of lies, of betrayal, of deceit. I felt like I had been living in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. My mind was consumed with the thought of Claire and James, with the betrayal that had torn my world apart. I couldn't understand how the woman I loved, the woman who had promised to be faithful to me, could do something so cruel. Claire tried to talk to me, to explain, but I couldn't bear to look at her. The sight of her, the sound of her voice, filled me with a mixture of anger and sadness that I couldn't control. I needed answers, but I wasn't sure I could handle the truth. One evening, I finally broke. Claire was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying, when I walked into the room. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "Why did you do this, Claire? Was I not enough for you?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "It wasn't about you, Danny," she said softly. "It was never about you. I've been feeling lost, like I've been drifting away from everything, and I didn't know how to stop it." Her words cut through me like a knife. "So you turned to him?" I asked, my voice rising in anger. "You betrayed me, our marriage, because you were feeling lost." "I know it sounds selfish, and I'm not trying to make excuses," she said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. And I'm so sorry." Her apology felt hollow, like a Band-Aid on a wound too deep to heal. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, and in that moment I knew the answer. She might not have said the words, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. I couldn't stay in that room, in that house, any longer. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away from the pain. Chapter 6. The Fallout. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, crashing at a friend's place, trying to make sense of the mess that my life had become. I couldn't go back to work, couldn't face the world, knowing that everything I had believed in was a lie. Claire tried to reach out to me, sending texts and leaving voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to be reminded of the betrayal that had ripped my life apart. My friends and family rallied around me, offering support, but nothing they said could ease the pain. I felt like a shell of the man I once was, hollowed out by the weight of my broken heart. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to find some way to cope with the anger and sadness that consumed me. It helped, a little, to talk about what I was feeling, to try to make sense of the emotions that were tearing me apart. But no matter how many sessions I went to, the pain didn't go away. I knew I needed to make a decision, to figure out if there was any way to salvage my marriage, or if it was time to walk away for good. But every time I thought about confronting Claire, about having that conversation, I felt paralyzed by fear and hurt. Chapter 7: The Final Decision. It was a cold, rainy day when I finally went back to our house. Claire had been staying with a friend, giving me space, but I knew she was waiting for me to make a decision. The house felt empty, lifeless, as I walked through the rooms that had once been filled with love and laughter. Now, they were just reminders of what I had lost. I found myself in our bedroom, standing in front of the mirror where we used to get ready together in the mornings. I could still see her reflection beside mine, smiling, happy in love. But that was a memory from another life, a life that no longer existed. Claire came home later that evening. She looked nervous, like she was bracing herself for what was to come. We sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "About us, about what happened, about what we do now." Claire nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I want to fix this, Danny," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, but I understand if you can't forgive me." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had spent weeks trying to figure out what I wanted, what I needed to move forward. And while part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe that we could find a way back to each other, another part of me knew that things would never be the same. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said finally, my voice cracking with emotion. "And without trust, I don't see how we can make this work." The tears that Claire had been holding back finally spilled over. "I understand," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm so sorry for what I've done." We sat there in silence, both of us crying for the love we had lost, for the future that had been shattered by her betrayal. I wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I couldn't. The pain was too deep, the wound too raw. "I think it's best if we go our separate ways," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll always love you, Claire, but I can't stay in a marriage where I can't trust you. It would destroy us both." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said again, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Danny. I wish I could take it all back." But there was no taking it back. The damage had been done, and now we had to face the consequences. Chapter 8: Moving On. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Claire and I finalized our divorce, dividing up our possessions, our memories, our life together. It was painful, like tearing apart the fabric of our lives, thread by thread. I moved into a small apartment across town, trying to rebuild my life one day at a time. It wasn't easy. Everywhere I went, I was haunted by memories of Claire, of the life we had shared, of the future we had once dreamed of. But I knew that I had made the right decision, that staying in a marriage without trust would have destroyed us both. I focused on my work, throwing myself into projects to keep my mind off the pain. I started seeing my friends more, trying to surround myself with people who cared about me, who could help me heal. Slowly, very slowly, the pain began to fade. Claire and I stayed in touch, mostly through occasional texts or emails. She had moved on with her life too, though she never mentioned James again. I didn't ask, and she didn't offer. It was easier that way. Eventually, I started dating again, though it was a long time before I felt ready to let someone else into my life. The scars from my marriage were still there, and I knew that I had to take things slow, to rebuild my trust and love one step at a time. But I didn't give up. I knew that I still had a lot of love to give, and that someday I would find someone who could help me heal, who could show me that love and trust could go hand in hand. Chapter 9, A New Beginning. It was a year after the divorce when I met Emma. She was different from anyone I had ever known, kind, understanding, with a gentle spirit that drew me in from the moment we met. We started out as friends, but as time went on, our relationship grew into something more. Emma knew about my past, about the pain I had been through, and she never pressured me to move faster than I was ready. She was patient, giving me the time and space I needed to heal, to trust again. And slowly, I began to open my heart to her. She showed me that love didn't have to be painful, that it could be a source of joy, of comfort, of strength. With her, I found the courage to believe in love again, to trust that not everyone would hurt me the way Claire had. Our relationship wasn't perfect, no relationship ever is, but it was built on a foundation of honesty, trust, and mutual respect. And that made all the difference. Chapter 10, Reflections. Looking back on everything that happened, I realize now that life is full of unexpected twists and turns, that even the most carefully laid plans can fall apart in an instant. But I also know that it's possible to rebuild, to find hope and happiness even in the darkest of times. Claire's betrayal was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, but it also taught me a lot about myself, about love, and about what it means to truly trust someone. I don't hold any ill will towards her anymore. I've made my peace with the past, and I've moved on. And as I sit here, reflecting on the journey that brought me to this point, I realize that life is a series of beginnings and endings, of losses and gains, of heartbreaks and new loves. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, love is what makes life worth living. And with Emma by my side, I know that I've found the kind of love that will stand the test of time, a love built on trust, respect, and a deep, abiding connection that can weather any storm. This story, though long and filled with emotional highs and lows, is a journey of loss, betrayal, healing, and ultimately, finding new love. It's a reminder that even when life takes unexpected and painful turns, there is always hope for a brighter future.